government hospital. There were no complications. He was an average sized baby, but the exact birth weight was not known to the parents. He was partially immunized for age. His previous immunization status were not known, but TT was received a few years back. As we can see in the pedigree, he was a product of non-consanguineous marriage, and this is the child who had come for consultation, and he had 2 other siblings who were alive and healthy. There is no family history of similar complaints. He was developmentally normal for age, student of class 11th, average in studies. His dietary intake was decreased in both calories as well as protein. His caloric intake was 2000 kilocalorie per day as against recommended of 2600 kilocalorie. Sorry, this is not kg, as against recommended of 2600 kilocal per day, and protein intake was 55 gram per day. This is wrong, not per kg. This is 55 gram per day as against recommended of 70 gram per day. On examination, his vitals were stable. His weight was 26.6 kg, which is less than 3rd percentile for his age. His height was 145.5 centimeter, which was again less than 3rd centile for his age. His body mass index, which is calculated as you know, weight in kg by height in meter square, was 12.6. Less than 15.5 for this age indicates severe thinness. He had severe pallor. His SMR, that is sexual maturity rating scale, was stage 3, which was appropriate for age, that is post-pubertal. There was no icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, lymphadenopathy or edema. There were no bleeding spots on skin. There was no hemolytic facies, no hyperpigmentation of knuckles, no dysmorphism. His bones and joints were normal. There was no swelling or tenderness. The spine was normal. Per abdomen was not distended. Soft spleen was palpable 2 cm below left costal margin. It was soft. Liver not palpable. Rest of the systemic examination was normal. As we can see here, his body mass index was 12.6, which is much below the less than -3 Z score, which indicates severe thinness. So our clinical diagnosis based on history and examination was pathological short stature with severe thinness, with constipation, with severe anemia. We call him pathological short stature because we had calculated his mid-parental height based on his mother's and father's height, and he was falling out of the target range of mid-parental height. Short stature actually can be classified into physiological or pathological. In physiological short stature, we can have familial short stature. If the parents are short, the genetic potential of the child, his height is short, but it is according to his parents, and that is called familial short stature. And the other is constitutional short stature, in which there is delayed puberty, which is also present in the parents, but his final height achieved will be normal. So he was classified as pathological short stature. Coming to the causes of pathological short stature, small for gestation age. This was ruled out because according to parents, he was an average size baby. Chronic renal failure, renal tubular acidosis, this was also ruled out. There was no history suggested, and as we will see further in investigations, his renal function tests were normal, urine routine microscopy was normal. Malabsorption was a definite possibility since he had history of chronic diarrhea. Undernutrition, yes, as the anthropometry suggests. Chronic anemia, yes. Other causes for pathological short stature, endocrine causes, hypothyroidism, growth hormone deficiency, Cushing syndrome. He didn't have any symptoms or signs which were suggestive of these. Rickets, skeletal dysplasia, congenital syndromes, again no signs that are suggestive of these. Psychosocial dwarfism, there were no psychosocial factors that were adverse in his family. Constitutional short stature, he attained puberty at a normal age, so this was also ruled out. Now coming to causes of severe thinness, IUGR, there was no history of low birth weight. Malnutrition, definitely his decreased intake, and anthropometry suggests the same. Chronic systemic illness like chronic congestive heart failure or chronic lung disease or chronic renal failure, malabsorption, chronic anemia, and psychosocial factors. So in this child we had play of malnutrition, malabsorption, and chronic anemia. Severe anemia. We kept a possibility of nutritional anemia in this case. The features in favor of nutritional anemia were chronic diarrhea, which is a history of malabsorption, decreased intake, and the anthropometry suggesting malnutrition. There were no factor against nutritional anemia. Hemolytic anemia, the feature in favor of hemolytic anemia was splenomegaly, although it was a mild one. Again, the features against hemolytic anemia where there were no hemolytic facies, no hepatomegaly, no jaundice. Aplastic anemia was virtually ruled out because there were no bleeding manifestations, and also we had splenomegaly, which is absent in aplastic anemia. Now coming to the investigations. Before the child visited us, multiple times he had been investigated and his hemoglobin had ranged around 5 gram per deciliter. His TLC was 4000 per millimeter cube, ANC was around 1500. Hemoglobin electrophoresis had been done, which was normal. His peripheral blood film was suggestive of microcytic hyperchromic anemia. We had a very strong suspicion of celiac disease in this child, but we had a TTG, this is tissue transglutaminase IgA antibody level, which was normal, that is 8.63 in this child. So, investigations done in our OPD, hemoglobin was 5.4 gram per deciliter, TLC 3600, ANC 1612, platelet was normal. RDW was increased 27%, retic count was normal 0.8%. His peripheral blood film had microcytic hyperchromic cells with anisocytosis and macrocytes suggestive of dimorphic nature. Serum ferritin was low normal 39 nanogram per ml. His kidney function test, liver function test, thyroid function test, calcium phosphorus ALP, random blood sugar, urine routine microscopy, stool examination was normal. Stool for ova fat was negative, so giardiasis was ruled out. Stool for fat was done in a private lab, which was negative. We couldn't repeat it because of non-availability of test in our center. Similarly, D-xylose could not be done, which is a test for malabsorption. His ultrasound abdomen showed enlarged spleen with span 13 cm, 11 to 12 cm normal for his age, so there was mild splenomegaly. Vitamin B12 and folate levels could not be done due to financial reasons. So we treated him like nutritional anemia. Iron, we started with 150 milligram per kg based on his body weight, 6 milligram per kg of iron, and we started with 150 milligram. But after a month we increased it to 200 milligram per day because there was no clinical response in his anemia. Oral vitamin B12 1000 microgram per day, folic acid 2.5 milligram per day, and we gave him dietary advice to increase his protein and calorie intake and for iron-rich foods. Now follow-up after 2 months. Hemoglobin still 4.9, TLC 2600, you can see here ANC 1136. Absolute neutrophil count less than 1500 suggests neutropenia. It's mild neutropenia when it is 1000 to 1500, moderate neutropenia when 500 to 1000, and severe neutropenia when less than 500. In view of non-response to genetics and high suspicion of celiac disease, TTG, that is tissue transglutaminase IgA antibody, was repeated, and the result came 257 units per ml. That was quite very high, and it was a positive serology. We advised him for duodenal biopsy, which was done at MGH hospital. It showed subtotal villus atrophy with crypt hyperplasia, with increased intraepithelial lymphocytes, with increased inflammation of lamina propria, which was modified Marsh type 3. We couldn't get the slides, we had requested for it, but we couldn't get it. So the diagnosis of celiac disease was established. So now we advised him for gluten-free diet. There's no wheat, barley or rye. Iron, we gave him a gluten-free diet chart, what all he can eat, what is to be avoided. Iron 200 milligram per day with vitamin C 200 milligram per day. Vitamin C to increase the absorption of iron. Folic acid 2.5 gram per day was continued. And now we gave him injectable vitamin B12 1000 microgram on alternate day for 10 days, and then we planned it to be given monthly. And multivitamin was started containing copper. The role of copper I will tell in further slides. So 2 months after starting gluten-free diet, hemoglobin still 4.5 grams. On asking the history, we got a history of non-compliance to gluten-free diet. So we explained to the child and to his parents regarding the importance of gluten-free diet in such children. And after 1.5 months on good compliance on GFD, we have a hemoglobin that has risen to 6.9 gram per deciliter, but the ANC is still low, 1100. After 5 months of hematinics and 3 months of gluten-free diet, his ANC is 1300. Hemoglobin although has risen to 9.3 gram per deciliter. In view of persistent neutropenia, we did a bone marrow aspiration which showed normoblastic erythropoiesis with mild megaloblastoid RBCs, so myelodysplastic syndrome was ruled out. After 6 months of gluten-free diet, we have a hemoglobin of 12.6 gram per deciliter, TLC of 4800, ANC fortunately has risen to 2,400, which is now normal. Weight has increased by 11 kgs and the height of the child has increased by 7 centimeters. You can see here in this growth chart, when he presented to us both his weight, the dots below show the weight and the upper dots indicate his height. So here we can see at presentation his weight was much less than the third centile, and after 6 months of gluten-free diet how significantly it has increased. Similarly height, there is a significant increase in height after 6 months of gluten-free diet. Now coming to a short discussion on celiac disease. As we all know, it is an immunologically mediated small intestinal enteropathy caused by permanent sensitivity to gluten, and it occurs in genetically susceptible individuals, mainly those with HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 genes. It is basically a T-cell mediated chronic inflammatory disorder with an autoimmune component. So the trigger is wheat, barley and rye, the gluten in these cereals. The host should be genetically susceptible, that is the HLA genes as I just mentioned, or some non-HLA genes are also important, and then the cofactors like intestinal infections and infant feeding practices. Intestinal infections caused by viruses and bacteria, mainly rotavirus has been found because of infections with these bacteria and viruses. The intestinal epithelium is damaged, the enterocyte is damaged, and it increases the susceptibility to gluten sensitivity and the incidence of celiac disease. Regarding infant feeding practices, it has been seen that prolonged breastfeeding decreases the incidence of celiac disease, and that is why the incidence of celiac disease is marginally low in India as compared to the European countries. Now coming to the immunopathology of celiac disease. This is the luminal site of the intestinal lining. Here we have the indigested fragment of gluten. It induces the enterocyte to release the protein called zonulin, which loosens the tight junctions between the enterocytes. Now the tight junction between enterocyte has been loosened, and we see here gluten gains entry into the epithelial through the epithelial lining, and it accumulates below the enterocytes. And then it stimulates the enterocytes to produce interleukin 15. Interleukin 15 then induces the intraepithelial lymphocytes, which further cause damage to the enterocytes. And now the damaged enterocytes release an enzyme called tissue transglutaminase, which then binds with the gluten, and this is now the modified gluten. Antigen presenting cell combines this modified gluten with HLA, DQ2 or DQ8 genes, and this is then presented to the helper T cells. Now helper T cells secrete chemokines and cytokines which further damage the enterocyte. They stimulate the killer T cells to directly act against the enterocytes, and also the helper T cells stimulate the mature B cells to produce antibodies against gluten as well as tissue transglutaminase, and this is what we measure when we do a serological testing. So these are the various mechanisms by which the enterocytes are damaged in celiac disease. Coming to the clinical spectrum, there is a wide clinical spectrum of celiac disease. The most common classical form, as we all know, which has GI manifestations, diarrhea or constipation, vomiting, anorexia, failure to thrive. Then comes the atypical form. In atypical forms, there are extraintestinal manifestations. The most common presentation of atypical form is anemia, especially iron refractory anemia. Even in adults, when you have iron refractory anemia, it has been found that 5% to 20% of iron refractory anemia in adults is because of celiac disease. So other extraintestinal manifestation ranges from head to toe. It can affect any organ. In neurological complications, we have ataxia, chorea, peripheral neuropathy, myelopathy, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Then in heart, it can cause dilated cardiomyopathy, it can cause pulmonary hemosiderosis, it can cause hepatitis, hypogonadism, osteoporosis. In skin manifestations, it is related with dermatitis herpetiformis, alopecia areata. So arthritis is another common extraintestinal manifestation. Then comes the silent form and the latent form. Here we can see the celiac iceberg model. So the celiac disease with classical or atypical symptoms is going only tip of the iceberg that is actually diagnosed. Rest we have silent celiac disease and latent celiac disease. Silent celiac disease is when you have abnormal serology as well as mucosal lesions, but the patient is asymptomatic. Latent celiac disease is abnormal serology is present, but normal mucosa, the intestinal mucosa, the small intestinal mucosa is normal, and they are also asymptomatic. In celiac disease with classic or atypical symptoms and silent celiac disease, gluten-free diet is advised. But in latent celiac disease, role of gluten-free diet is not clear, but they have to be kept under surveillance to see when they develop symptoms or when the mucosal changes appear. Since our child had hematological manifestations of celiac disease in the form of anemia and neutropenia, to elaborate these, so hematological manifestation of celiac disease may be anemia, thrombocytosis, thrombocytopenia, leukopenia, coagulopathy, IgA deficiency, lymphoma. Thrombocytosis mainly occurs because as an accompaniment of iron deficiency anemia. Thrombocytopenia occurs mainly because of megaloblastic anemia. Leukopenia, neutropenia, there are various causes which I will come in the further slide. Coagulopathy, it can be in the form of bleeding manifestations because of malabsorption of vitamin K, or even venous thromboembolism because of pro-thrombotic factors like protein C, protein S, even hyperhomocystinemia, which is seen in celiac disease. IgA deficiency, 10-15% cases of celiac may be IgA deficiency. So it is important in serological diagnosis because when we do a IgA, TTG, they may come out to be negative. But if you have a high suspicion, we should do a IgG antibody. And lymphoma, as some of us may know, there is a risk of entropathy associated T-cell lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma of the small intestine, especially in untreated cases. So coming to the causes of neutropenia in celiac disease, severe iron deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, folic acid, copper deficiency, and autoimmune. So these all can be the reasons for neutropenia in our case. We treated him with 6 months of gluten-free diet and these hematinics, and he improved. We couldn't get the levels of vitamin B12, folic acid, and copper. So we cannot exactly pinpoint what was the cause of anemia in this child, but most likely it was these nutrient deficiencies. Now coming to the prevalence. The worldwide prevalence of celiac disease is 0.5 to 1%, and prevalence of celiac disease in India is 0.7%. There was a recent study published in 2011 in Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology, a study done by in AIIMS Delhi, which showed even the prevalence of celiac disease as high as 1%, but this was done in North India. As North India is basically the wheat eating population, so the incidence of celiac disease in India is higher in North India, which is comparable to that of the West, and it's low in South India. Prevalence of anemia in newly diagnosed celiac disease is as high as 12 to 69% in various studies. The common age of presentation of the classical form with GI manifestations is 6 months to 2 years, and that with atypical form is around 8 years, which usually come with anemia which is refractory to hematinics. Now coming to the diagnosis of celiac disease, serological testing is a screening test. Whenever a suspicion of celiac disease is there, we order for tissue transglutinase IgA antibody because it has the highest sensitivity and specificity. Then the anti-endomycin antibody, and then the anti-gliadin antibodies, which are lower sensitivity and specificity. As I said, in IgA deficiency patients, if you have a high suspicion of celiac and your serology is coming negative, you should go for IgG, anti-gliadin antibodies. Now, the small bowel biopsy is the gold standard for celiac disease. You can take a biopsy from the second part of duodenum or further, and since celiac disease is a patchy disease, multiple biopsies are indicated. So, according to European Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition current criteria, 2 requirements are mandatory for the diagnosis of celiac disease: villus atrophy with hyperplasia of crypts with abnormal surface epithelium in the form of intraepithelial lymphocytes while the patient is on gluten diet, and full clinical remission after withdrawal of gluten-free diet. After 6 months of gluten-free diet, tissue transglutinase IgA antibody levels can be checked, and it should decrease or normalize if the child is adherent to the gluten-free diet. This is the Marsh overall classification, or the modified Marsh classification. So if intraepithelial lymphocytes are more than 40 per 100 enterocytes, but crypts and villi are normal, which is great, it is type 1. Type 2 is intraepithelial lymphocyte more than 40, but crypts hyperplasia is present, villi is normal. When villi become affected, mild atrophy, marked atrophy absent, we grade them as 3A, 3B and 3C. Here you can see the villi becoming broader and shorter, and here you can see the crypt hyperplasia, the elongation of the crypts. So the type 1 is infiltrative lesion, in which you can see the intraepithelial lymphocytes. Here the ratio of villus height to crypt depth is more than 3:1. In hyperplastic type, we see the crypt's elongation occurring, and so now the ratio of villus to crypt depth becomes 2:1. And then the destructive type, 3A, 3B, 3C, where we can see the progressive atrophy of villi, and here the total villus atrophy. This is the biopsy specimen showing the same. Here we have the intraepithelial lymphocytes only. Here we can see crypt hyperplasia in stage 2. In 3A, 3B, 3C, we have villus becoming blunted, and here further subtotal villus atrophy, and here we can see total villus atrophy. So treatment for celiac disease, as we have already discussed, gluten-free diet, iron, vitamin B12, folic acid, multivitamins containing copper if we have neutropenia, and importantly, in case of iron deficiency anemia, iron should be given for 2 years in celiac disease, as against 3 months that is advised for a normal iron deficiency anemia. Because in celiac disease, it takes 1 year for the hemoglobin to normalize and another 1 year for the ferritin stores to be depleted. So finally, the take-home messages. Celiac disease should be considered if hematological derangements occur with GI symptoms and or short stature. The real challenge is to recognize the asymptomatic or oligosymptomatic celiac disease, and this can be done by screening of at-risk individuals. The first degree relatives of celiac disease, type 1 diabetes mellitus and other autoimmune diseases, Down syndrome, Turner syndrome should be done so that we pick up more and more asymptomatic or oligosymptomatic diseases. Thank you.
May I add something?
Yes, sir.
First, I would like to add the importance of electrolyte imbalance, because we have treated one patient in our ICU with severe electrolyte imbalance, presenting as a classic paralysis and a provisional diagnosis of AIDP. Then it turned out to be severe hypokalemia, and then towards the second, it turned out to be a patient of CAD. Correction of electrolyte, because electrolyte imbalance is very important. Hypokalemia, severe hypokalemia, sodium and calcium imbalances, they are also right.
You come.
Sir, the celiac disease or electrolyte imbalance, sir, not very common because it is usually a chronic diarrhea. So it is electrolyte imbalance is more common in acute diarrhea. But of course, when we have
He was a case of long-standing celiac disease.
Yes, sir. But of course, we can have acute episodes in a case of celiac disease, and it will worsen the situation and cause electrolyte
The
imbalance.
patient was in the range of say 1.4.
Yes, it can happen definitely, but he's asking if it's common.
So these are the patients who actually have something called a celiac crisis, where the frequency of diarrhea suddenly increases to a large extent. And once we have diarrhea, it is bound to create a lot of electrolyte imbalance in the body. So it's a disturbance, that is a known complication that severe hypokalemia not only presenting with acid paralysis, but sometimes these patients even die because of anemia and poor hypokalemia.
Zado's absorption test, we have narrowed the diagnosis slides very basic.
We wanted to do it, but it is not available in our lab, and he was not, the child was not willing to spend outside, that's why. And even stool for fat, surprisingly, it was normal. The yard stage for
So, Nidhi, I have a question for you. As far as the management of this case is concerned, why did you consider giving him injectable iron to begin with?
Why didn't we consider it? Sir, injectable iron we had definitely considered. So after two months when he was not responding to iron, and when we got a diagnosis of celiac disease, so we said why don't we give a trial of gluten? I mean, when we had started gluten-free diet, now absorption will increase. So we said we'll wait for some time and see if hemoglobin increases. And after 2 months we got a response, so we deferred the parenteral
Because his anemia would have responded very well.
Because parenteral iron has its own side effects. Because we got a diagnosis of celiac, so
Which part of the intestine is most commonly affected or most severely affected?
It is the duodenum and the jejunum, but mainly the duodenum.
Then sir is saying rightly why, because iron is majorly absorbed from upper jejunum.
Yes.
Okay. So if your jejunum part is not functioning well, then it's always imperative to give your parenteral iron. But as you said, it is associated with some problem. So it is to be given only when oral iron therapy cannot
Be given.
like malabsorption syndrome, or jejunum is removed, surgical removal, resection, or your patient receiving erythropoietin therapy. Even if you give oral iron therapy, that cannot cope up with the demand by the body. So you always give parenteral therapy.
Even vitamin B12, most of them say parenteral is not required. You could have given oral, but again it would take a longer time.
Longer
And
time.
since we had a bone marrow also which showed megaloblastoid RBC, so we gave parenteral.
This is a myth. If you give oral iron, parenteral iron, the response will be faster with parenteral iron. It is not like that. It is not like that. Because even if you give parenteral iron, it is processed by the reticular endothelial system, then it is released slowly. And with oral also, once it reaches in the blood, then only RBC can, bone marrow can utilize it. So you cannot expect faster response, but stores, you can replete stores faster with parenteral. That is the advantage.
There is another thing that I think I need to discuss with the clinicians is whenever you're treating any case of anemia, the best judge whether the anemia is responding to your treatment is to do a reticulocyte count between 10 and 14 days. And very often, it is not done. You will get an excellent, let's say, information whether your anemia case is responding by just doing a reticulocyte count between 10 and 14 days. That's the thought. Another thing I want to tell you as far as the biopsy is concerned, many times we people are stuck when we are stuck with cases which look like MARSH1 and MARSH2. There is an ancillary technique that we can use while we do biopsies, is that these cells, the lymphocytes, the intraepithelial lymphocytes, all are CD8 positive cells. So if you have immunohistochemistry and you're doubtful whether you're dealing with a non-specific enteritis or a celiac disease, you must do a CD8. And if all the lymphocytes light up on CD8, you can be certain that there is celiac disease. So that's an ancillary tool these days now we are using to diagnose celiac disease in biopsy.
Even HLA typing has a role in diagnosis of celiac disease. Suppose we have a strong suspicion of celiac disease and the serology is negative. That can occur in less than 18 months or 2 years of age because they have poor humoral responses or they are IgA deficient. So, and you want a biopsy to be done, but they are not willing, so you can order for HLA typing. As I said, HLA genes DQ2 and DQ8 have a very good true negative predictive value. That means they are present in virtually all cases of celiac disease. So if it's negative, it rules out celiac. But positive predictive value is less because 40% of normal individuals also have these genes.
In India, tropical stool is more common than the celiac disease, which have a more prevalence, right? And because both have similar manifestation. So how on the clinical basis we can differentiate?
Clinical basis, again, on the clinical basis we cannot. When we say chronic diarrhea, we have to keep these possibilities of tropical sprue, celiac disease, and then we advise for a serology.
Yeah, serology and biopsy are only two things.
Yes,
We
otherwise we can't
distinguish.
differentiate.
Only two things. Clinically, you probably can't distinguish.
And preference-wise, celiac disease and tropical stool,
Yeah, tropical sprue is definitely more common. I cannot tell you the exact prevalence, but it's more common than celiac disease.
there is a definition of normal fertility levels.
Normal ferritin levels are 29 to 397.
It's a huge range.
Normal fertility levels.
Yeah, it was no normal, yes.
Normal stores, that means simple translation is normal iron store. How is that explained?
So that's what we said, it was a dimorphic picture. We have low, it was low normal, 39, not high. So there was a component of vitamin B12 and folic acid deficiency also, which came in the peripheral blood film, as well as the bone marrow, which showed megaloblastoid RBCs.
The normal IgM level,
So initially it was done from outside, and that is why.
The recommendation is if you have a clinical suspicion and you get one negative, you must repeat it after 4 weeks. One doesn't mean
single test is not there.
Yes, like even in Down syndrome, annually we advise for because celiac disease can develop at